Let me take this opportunity to, of course, introduce our very first guest, which is the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa's Director General, Mr. Lionel October. Lionel, good evening and welcome to Beyond Markets. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Now, of course, Lionel, a very big event for the DTI as one of the key departments in driving the BRICS agenda. Just take us through, from the DTI's perspective, why this conference is so central to South Africa's economic trajectory, not just on the African continent, but also in the emerging economies of the world.
Well, as you know, we've got a business delegation, about 500 strong, about 100 business persons from the five countries will be assembling here. We will be hosting, as we do every year, a business forum. But at this particular year, it's going to be different. We're going to launch a permanent mechanism to have greater collaboration between business people. So we're creating a business council, which will be 5 business leaders from each country, 25 strong council. But they will also be setting up sectoral forums in finance, infrastructure, manufacturing, which will meet throughout the year. So we will not only be meeting on an annual basis now, it will be a permanent forum to really deepen collaboration and economic cooperation between the BRICS countries.
Now, of course, these business councils are made up of big players in the private sector as well across the 5 countries. Sketch for us, Lionel, the relationship between the private sector players and, of course, the governments involved in the BRICS formation and how it will work in this council.
Well, as you know, most of the emphasis of BRICS has been on political and intergovernmental cooperation. That has really been the strong points of BRICS. We want to take that to a higher level now and really increase economic collaboration, but especially to deepen investment. Trade has been growing quite exponentially between BRICS countries, especially between South Africa and China, South Africa and India. What hasn't happened at that same level is investment. So what we're trying to do through this business council is really to increase investment. But as you know, the main agenda of South Africa and Africa is industrialization or the growth of the manufacturing sector on the African continent. So the purpose or our agenda as South Africa is really, because we'll be the chairpersonship for the first year, to embed an investment agenda in addition to a trade agenda.
Now, when we talk about industrialization, it's often seen as another word for protectionism, and a lot of private sector players feel quite put off by this. How does the DTI marry the central focus on industrialization with attracting investment, particularly from foreign players?
Well, as you know, Africa now is really the only continent that doesn't have a strong industrial and manufacturing sector. So we have a very imbalanced economy which is not sustainable. Basically, we're relying on the commodity sector and on the mining sector. And so if you looked at Brazil, if you look at India, if you look at China, they have really a diversified economy with strong mineral sectors, but also strong manufacturing and strong services. In Africa, we have that missing element, which is the industrial sector. And it's also the cause of our underdevelopment and our cause of intra-African trade. So therefore, the manufacturing industrial sector is key to build on the continent.
Now, talk us through some of the investment challenges when looking at the BRICS countries. Often people talk about the fact that some of the players are so big that it is not, a very fair way of trade, and that often you have China, even India to some extent, coming onto Africa, extracting, going off very little value add, very little beneficiation. How is the Business Council meant to change that kind of, one-way relationship between Africa and the rest of the BRICS partners?
Well, as I indicated, the bulk of trade has been the export of raw materials and just mineral commodities from Africa and from South Africa to, let's say, China and so on. Our objective is to change the structure of our trade, to have much more value-added export, manufactured exports to China. But it presents great opportunities because of the size of China's market. It creates a massive market for our manufactured products. So what we are trying to create is a much more reciprocal, equitable relationship where we're not just exporters of commodities, but of manufactured products. So that is the agenda. Most of the countries have agreed to that agenda, and that's why they've now formed to create this permanent mechanism where we can, as I said, on a regular regular basis interact and build investment. But what it is, we're going to be announcing about 10 major industrial projects, industrial and financial projects in the sector. For example, in energy, we've already got a commitment from China through the investment in Standard Bank to make 20 billion rand available for investment in the renewable energy infrastructure sector and so on. So in addition to building the manufacturing sector, the other part is going to be infrastructure. As you know, we're trying to promote inter-Africa trade, but there you need significant financial resources to build road, rail, ports, and that's going to be the other part of the BRICS Business Council.
Now, of course, the plans are ambitious. Where are we going to get the money to match the ambition?
Well, that's why, as you know, one thing which will be announced is the formation of a BRICS-led development bank. So that bank will obviously be fully capitalized, and it will provide support mainly for large infrastructure projects and so on. So that is where the finance is going to come from. But as I said, in addition to that, we also got major players already, some of the big banks, Standard Bank, others, which are already committing to invest on the continent and in there. So I think what we've created so far in the BRICS is now the institutional mechanisms to finance the investment.
Now, obviously accessing capital is a big issue, but one of the drawbacks for investors is often what they call policy inconsistencies across the African continent. To what extent will the BRICS Council be able to navigate for investors, you know, the kind of policy terrains, because often you're working off very different bases in the various African countries?
Well, as I said, that's why we're now with the formation of a permanent business council. We'll be able to work through all the infrastructure and policy constraints. So because government is fully part of that process as well, we'll have a permanent forum to engage immediately with any problems. But as I said, the investment tide is already turning. As you know, we've had major investments by China, by India, in the automotive sector, in the chemical sectors, in telecommunications, and in the banking sector and so on. And it's across the continent now, where I think the investment tide has already turned. It's for us to just take it to a higher level and move it out of just, let's say, mining and sort of isolated sectors, but move it into the broader manufacturing sector.
Lionel, just in terms of the representation, you said that you're going to be having a huge delegation, over 500, and of course 5 from each BRIC country. There has been some kind of discussion around South Africa obviously being the only African country in the club. What other African business institutions, or countries for that matter, are part of this initiative as key players on the continent? Lots of people are arguing, for example, Nigeria is Africa's second largest economy. Ought they not to have some kind of participation? How did you work out who from Africa has a place at the table in terms of this business council?
Well, as you know, the president has invited regional representatives, so there will be about 10 African heads of states which will be part of this. We'll also have a BRICS Africa dialogue at the end of this session, and there will be, as I said, a person from each region on the continent coming, and that's how they were chosen. So we from each of the regional blocks on the continent will be here. But the theme of the conference, we're making not South Africa, but African industrialization. As I said, obviously we want to grow South Africa's manufacturing sector, but we also need to build the industrial sector in areas like Nigeria, Kenya, and so on. So the industrialization effort is not a South African effort, it is on behalf of the continent.
Final question, Lionel, just in terms of time frames, take us through when the permanent mechanism will be in place. Where will it be housed? Will it be roving, you know, from BRIC country to BRIC country? How is the structure envisaged, and by when will it be up and running? Well,
we've just completed all the negotiations around the terms of reference, the constitution, and the makeup of the council, so it will be launched tomorrow. The BRICS Business Council. For the first year, South Africa holds the chairpersonship, so it will, in South Africa, we will house the full-time secretariat for that. It will then shift each year to the new chairperson of the BRICS Council. So as I said, it will take place immediately, but also we will be launching a number of memorandums of understandings, agreements of about 10 investment projects which will be announced. For example, there's the undersea cable which links the 5 countries. There's, for example, some risk insurance tools that will be launched and so on. So I think things are, as I said, will be given momentum after this
Well, certainly exciting developments there. Thank you so much, Lionel. Of course, that was Lionel October, the Director General of the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa.